if you tell people preemptively that your local police will not cooperate. So if ICE calls you up and says to Minneapolis, we have a guy, this bad guy, we want to pick him up. He's been convicted of an assault and he's now needs to be deported. If the policy of Minneapolis is not to cooperate at all, I mean, there's going to be a real problem, and then they're going to say we need more ICE agents. So what happens right now, Mr. Ellison, Attorney General Ellison, if I'm from ICE and I call Minneapolis and I say, John Smith is wanted.
3,000 ICE agents flooded into one state. A man arrested with 50 pounds of meth let go. A notorious criminal on ICE's most wanted list, already sitting in jail with a detainer that nobody acted on. This hearing just exposed exactly how broken the communication between local police and federal immigration enforcement really is, and nobody in that room could agree on something as basic as whether Minneapolis cops are even picking up the phone.
Thank you all for your testimony. I think there is a way we can get beyond, our differences on immigration and our differences on approach. And I think, but we have to look at this in a broad scope and try to leave some of that aside. I think there is no justification for bad behavior from law enforcement, whether it's your local police or others. It has to be investigated, it needs to be corrected. You have to change your policies. You have to announce that you're going to do a better job. But I think there is an explanation for why there's 3,000 ICE agents in Minnesota. One explanation has been put forward was vindictive. Maybe, I don't know for sure. But I do know that if you tell people preemptively that your local police will not cooperate, so if ICE calls you up and says to Minneapolis, we have a guy, we're just presuming it's a guy because more bad people out there, unfortunately, are men than women. It's a guy, this bad guy, we want to pick him up. He's been convicted of an assault and he's now needs to be deported. If the policy of Minneapolis is not to cooperate at all, I mean, there's going to be a real problem, and then they're going to say we need more ICE agents. So what happens right now, Mr. Ellison, Attorney General Ellison, if I'm from ICE and I call Minneapolis and I say, John Smith is wanted and will you help us? Could we have 10 Minneapolis policemen go with 1 or 2 agents and arrest him? Or do we have to have 12 agents and no Minneapolis police? What happens?
Well, under Minnesota statute 631.50, anybody convicted of a felony who's in custody must be questioned about their nationality.
That's in custody. That's sort of a different question.
Okay.
I'm talking about somebody who's in the community and they need help arresting this person.
Right, but you said felony, so
you're right.
that's what maybe.
And that's a different. We'll talk about that. But
Yeah.
Let's talk about somebody they want help, and is the local police force going to give them help, or do they have to bring in all ICE agents to do it?
Certainly, targeted enforcement is not the problem, as has been said.
But I think that's what has been said of some of your policies, and the interpretation is that they don't have to and won't cooperate with ICE.
Well, Mr. Chairman, first of all, they're not my policies, just so all the members of the committee know. When you see advice or an advisory opinion coming from the Attorney General's office, this is not my opinion. It is the lawyers in my offices at my best analysis of what the law requires. So I say that to you because even if I didn't issue an opinion, the law would still be what it was.
But a month ago, if ICE called the local Minneapolis police and said, we want to arrest this person, will the Minneapolis police help ICE to arrest a person?
I think so, yes.
Well, and now we're at a question of facts.
But see, Mr.
I
Chairman,
think most people are arguing that that's not true and that that's a reason for the surge. If it is true, then the local officials need to say they will. But I mean, the mayor of Minneapolis said used crude language to tell them where to go. He didn't say, oh, we're not going to help you arrest 5-year-old boys because we think that's wrong. But if you have a rapist, we'll help you elect rapists, assault people, thieves, drug kingpins, et cetera. But it doesn't sound like that's what's happening to me. I mean, do you really think that it is happening? They're cooperating?
Yes, I do, Senator.
All right.
And let me just, if you'd allow me just to elaborate, I think that what we're dealing with is a difference of what the scenario is. If you're talking about a person who's been convicted of a crime where in targeted enforcement, you will see Minnesota officials make sure that that person is addressed properly and deals with their consequences when it comes to immigration.
So,
When it
so,
comes,
so Representative Niska, do you think the local police are cooperating if ICE calls them?
No, the public statements of Minneapolis officials have been that Minneapolis police will not assist in enforcing immigration. Perhaps they'll assist if there's some state crime that's alleged, but if ICE were to call in your scenario and say, we need to pick somebody up for violating immigration law, the Minneapolis public statements have been that they won't. And the example we saw just this last week of someone who was arrested with 50 pounds, an illegal immigrant arrested with 50 pounds of meth on January 8th was allowed to go free and had to be taken by ICE last week.
Thank you. Mr. Schnell, I would like to know, and I've watched some of your interviews, so I am impressed with the idea that ICE was saying there was 1,300 people. You reviewed them. Some of these people aren't in Minnesota, never were in Minnesota. Some have been released to ICE themselves, and their list is just flat out wrong. The most impressive thing I heard in one of your interviews was that somebody named Lou Mua was a person that they were, saying, this is why we have to break down doors because this terrible person. Sounds like he probably is a terrible person, but you said he was in jail already, and he had a detainer. So I think that truth needs to be explored if that is really happening. There used to be, people said, a direct portal, though. So when you did it or somebody got booked, it went directly to ICE. Does that still exist, or do you have to do them one at a time in prison?
So, Mr. Chair, at present, we provide notification in accordance with law to ICE when they come in. There are systems that are available to people to be able to get that, for ICE to be able to get that information.
I was told that Mayorkas stopped the portal, and the portal was a very fast portal, where it was sort of automatically done. True or not true?
It is true that there is a portal that ICE can access.
It was stopped under Mayorkas.
I believe so.
Okay. But you still do your job. You do your detainers in. And so one of the questions goes back to Attorney General Morris's point. So, and look, I'm a stickler for the law. I'm a libertarian on these issues. If detaining somebody who's already served their sentence doesn't make sense to me. But here's my question. If someone is in your prison for 5 years, which some of them are going to be in prison 5 years, they're also wanted and they're at a detainer, which means they haven't had their judgment. Why couldn't we go to immigration court during the 5 years in prison? Does that happen, and why doesn't it happen?
Mr. Chairman, I believe there are some rare instances where we have had people who have had immigration proceedings while they've been in custody and, where removal.
That would answer some of the questions. Then you have a final court judgment. You go through a court, he's going to be represented, and we're going to go through the final judgment. And then Attorney General's problem that, they've not, a detainer's a request, not a conviction, then they would have had their conviction, it's much easier. But they also, if it's seamlessly working, is it most of the time when you notify ICE, are they showing up on the day they're going to release and it's a peaceful turnover? Or are they doing it half the time, 20% of the time, 100% of the time? How's it working?
Mr. Chairman, I think there has been wide-scale cooperation for a long time. We have had, excellent experiences, and the local staff of the Department of Corrections and the local ICE office are very effective.
Senator Peters.
What you just watched is what happens when immigration policy stops being about people and becomes about politics. A Senate hearing, multiple officials, one simple question asked over and over again. Is Minneapolis cooperating with ICE or not? And depending on who you asked, you got a completely different answer. Minnesota's Attorney General said yes, cooperation is happening. Targeted enforcement, violent criminals, felony convictions, the system is working. The Republican state representative sitting right next to him said absolutely not. That Minneapolis has publicly stated its police will not assist ICE on immigration enforcement, period. Both of them were in the same room, looking at the same reality, and they could not agree on basic facts. That tells you everything you need to know about where we are right now. But here's what wasn't really disputed. 3,000 ICE agents were deployed to Minnesota. That is an enormous number for one state. And the senator chairing this hearing, who is not exactly a hardliner on immigration, acknowledged there's at least a partial explanation for why. When local law enforcement preemptively announces it won't cooperate with federal agents, ICE has to bring more of its own people because they can't rely on backup. The result? Instead of 1 or 2 federal agents with 10 local officers making a quiet, efficient arrest, you get 12 federal agents, no local support, and the kind of heavy-handed operations that end up on the news. Nobody wins in that scenario. Not the community, not law enforcement, not even ICE. Then there was the detail that stopped the hearing cold. A man was arrested in January carrying 50 pounds of methamphetamine. He was in the country illegally, and instead of being handed to ICE, he was released. ICE had to track him down weeks later on their own. 50 pounds of meth released. And yet ICE's own list of 1,300 targets in Minnesota, according to the officials reviewing it, some of those people were never even in Minnesota. Some had already been handed over to ICE. The list itself had serious errors. So you have federal agents working off a flawed list, local officials who may or may not be cooperating depending on who's talking, and a portal, a direct automatic notification system that used to alert ICE the moment someone was booked, that got shut down. That portal is gone now, and in its place, manual notifications, case by case, one at a time. Senator Rand Paul raised something that almost nobody is talking about publicly. If someone is sitting in a Minnesota prison for 5 years and they have an immigration detainer, why isn't their immigration case being heard while they're already incarcerated? You have a captive timeline, you know where they are, you have years to process it through the courts properly, give them representation, get a final judgment, and when they complete their sentence, you have a clean, legal, court-ordered answer on what happens next. Instead, the system waits, does nothing, and then scrambles at the moment of release, creating exactly the chaos, confusion, and confrontation that everyone claims they want to avoid.
The thing that struck me most watching this exchange wasn't the disagreements. It was the senator's framing at the very start. He said, "There's a difference between an explanation and a justification." He wasn't defending the raids. He wasn't defending agents arresting 5-year-olds or breaking down wrong doors. He said clearly that has to be investigated and corrected. But he was trying to trace the chain of events that led to 3,000 federal agents descending on one state. And that chain starts with a breakdown in communication, a breakdown in trust, a breakdown in the basic working relationship between local and federal law enforcement. When that relationship collapses, everybody loses. The criminals who should have been deported years ago stay on the street longer. The families who get caught in aggressive sweeps shouldn't have been targeted in the first place. And the communities in between are left watching federal agents do the job that local police could have done quietly, with more precision, more care, and a fraction of the disruption. This isn't a story about whether you're pro-immigration or anti-immigration. It's a story about whether the system works at all. Right now, based on what you just watched, the answer is clearly no.